Today we're going to be looking at two classic analog synths by Roland and asking the question, are they worth it? Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. And today we're going to be looking at the Roland JX-8P and the Roland JX-3P and asking, are they worth it? Two classic analog synths, two of the last analog synths that Roland put out in the market. Are they good investments for today's musician? Is it worth looking at it for your collection? What are the equivalents that are out today in today's market that you could probably replace it with? All questions we're going to answer in the video. So first, a little history on the JX-8P and the JX-3P. The JX-3P came out first part of the 80s, and the 8P came out afterwards in the latter part of the 80s. And they were really in response in some ways to the Yamaha DX7, which began the mass exodus from analog to digital, and it kind of accelerated that trend that was already ongoing from VCOs to DCOs to FM synthesis, and then into the 90s where it almost entirely replaced analog synths with digital synths. So the trend at the time was to get away from the knobs and the sliders that were omnipresent on earlier analog synths and simplify it. So you see the membrane buttons, you see you had to menu dive to really do sound synthesis, or you had to use one of these controllers that did not come with the original units, the PG800 or the PG200, to make it feel like a more classic analog synth. And they did this in response to the Yamaha DX7, whose layout was very similar to this and who did not have all the buttons and knobs. It was partially a cost-cutting measure. Yamaha kind of showed it was possible, introduced a lower price point synth, and so the other manufacturers followed suit. And the DX7 really disrupted the synth market, put people out of business, and it really took the other manufacturers like Roland, who survived, a while to catch up in the design and manufacturing of their synths. So the JX-8P and the JX-3P kind of occupy an interesting place in history in that they were popular, but they weren't the most popular, and they're definitely not the most iconic Roland analog synth. And you could still find them for, the 8P and the 3P, you can find them for a couple $100. I think their price point is going between $500 and $1,000. And the PG800s and the PG200s cost about the same, about $500. And the reason is these units are incredibly hard to use without the controller. It really is limited. It feels like a digital synth, even though it is analog, in the way that it functions and the kind of sound, the amount of sounds that you're able to access off the front panel. And in order to modify any of the sounds, you have to do some deep menu diving that is not very fun. So they've kind of been misunderstood and forgotten, I think. And when people are looking at, I want a classic analog synth, they don't generally think I want a JX-8P or a JX-3P or the JX-10, which is the version of the JX-8P that's got two JXPs inside of it, basically. So the question is, are these good investments? Are they worth it? Their prices are low. Is it low for a reason? And in my opinion, these are both very underrated analog synths. If you look at the price of a Juno 60, if you look at the price of a Juno 106, you look at the price of the Jupiters, the feature set that you're getting in the JX-8P and the JX-3P and the sound are really, really strong value propositions. You are getting a lot out of these. The capability, specifically, in my opinion, of the JX-8P, which has two envelopes and two DCOs. The 3P has two DCOs, I think just one envelope. But they both have cross modulation. You can get some really strange, awesome sounds out of these synthesizers, and sounds that are not really accessible in the one DCO synths of the Juno 106 and the Juno 60, which are super classic and are amazing. I love them both. But these are out, they have more features, they have more possibilities with the amount of synthesis you can do just by nature of having more envelopes and more oscillators on it. So I really think that these are underrated and undervalued. And I think part of the reason is they're less easy to use. They also lack some things like an arpeggiator, which make the Juno 60 so fun. It just lacks some accessibility that those other synths kind of have right out of the gate. And also, I think people really misunderstand the PG800 and the PG200. You don't have to have the original PG800 or the PG200 to unlock all of those parameter kind of controls. There's a lot of aftermarket devices that you can buy, or there's even apps that you can connect via USB to MIDI and access the same features. So you can get all the things that make this unit really interesting and usable via fairly inexpensive apps and aftermarket kind of modules. So that's not, it is well known, but it's also not super well known, I think, and that's part of the reason I wanted to make this video. Is I would really highly encourage you, if you're into vintage analog synths, look at these two as a first option. You're getting way more than most of the analog synths that you're looking at that price point. It's a very, very powerful synth. And personally, the differences between these two, people say the JX-3P is closer to a Juno 60 as it's a little bit harsher, and the JX-8P is a little bit warmer and better for pads and strings. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I still think the JX-3P is not very close to the Juno 60 in sound. You can get closer, but it's still not that close. And I personally like the JX-8P better than the JX-3P because of the massive sounds you can get out of it. It's very good for creating very lush, kind of heavy, warm sounds. Not any of the pre-built stuff, but through the controller, you can create some really fun, kind of large, kind of pad sound. So I really like the JX-8P. One of the cons on both of them really, is they have batteries to do patch memory, and the batteries can, you have to replace the batteries inside, otherwise they can leak, so you have to do maintenance there. The JX-8P also, the action's really nice, but it also, over time, the aftertouch almost on every JXP that's vintage, if it hasn't been kind of refurbished, doesn't work, and the keys tend to get sticking keys that have to get repaired where the note will hold. And so that can be kind of annoying from a maintenance standpoint. You can always MIDI control it. I'm probably going to MIDI control this one when we do the demo because it does, I think, have a sticking key, maybe two. So there is maintenance issues with these. They're fairly easy to service, and those are not difficult things to fix on an analog synth or expensive. But again, I would say that these are two of the best value analog synths on the market today that you can still get at a very affordable price. In terms of replicas that have been created or other options besides buying a vintage analog synth to get the same tonal palette, Roland has done a boutique series on the JX-3P, one of their modules, and on the Jupiter X and the Jupiter X FM, one of the sound modules in that unit itself is the JXP sound module, and those units have a lot of knobs that allow you to kind of take on those controls and get that feel, so it kind of solves that problem. So if you're not interested in getting a vintage analog synth but want a kind of modern version, there's the Jupiter X, the Jupiter X FM, and there's also the Roland boutique module for that one, and the Roland Cloud. You can also access all those sounds as kind of VSTs. So let's listen to these, kind of see how they sound different, and hopefully you get a sense. I'll play some preset patches as well as fiddle around with the controller and give you a sense of some of the expressive capabilities. And then we'll summarize at the end, and hopefully you enjoy hearing them. So let's get started. So what do you think? Is it undervalued? Is it overvalued? Do you like the sound, or do you think the sound sucks? I'd love to hear your comments below. I know everybody has an opinion, and I know these can be pretty controversial when it comes to any opinion expressed about a classic analog synth. So love to hear your thoughts. Also love to know if we made any mistakes in kind of talking about the history or features that I left out. Please let us know below, and we'll happily correct it. In summary, my personal view is that these are great, undervalued classic analog synths from Roland. I think it's a great place to start if you are interested in that kind of thing and you want to have an analog synth in your collection that's kind of a vintage one. I think the prices will go up over time. I think they're misunderstood, especially because of the controllers. People think they have to have the controller to get access to the kind of deeper parts of the synth. You don't. You can use the iPad app that's available and really unlock its full expressive potential. So if you haven't, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications if you like the video, and let us know what other videos you'd like to learn, like to hear about for is it worth it type topics for vintage synths. We'd love to do a few more of these and would love to hear your thoughts about which ones are most interesting. And if you have any other questions, comments, want to talk about synths, reach out to us at alamomusic.com. You can email us at yourfriends@alamomusic.com, call us, or chat with us on the site. We'd love to meet you. So until next time, talk to you later.